Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Welcome to the first week of Rocket Summer. Rocket Summer, which is a fantastic reading event that was created for BookTube by Michael K. Vaughan over on his fantastic channel. I'll link his channel down in the description below. Go and check his channel out if you haven't already. It's wonderful. But Michael K. Vaughan came up with this reading event, and it is reading classic science fiction for the month of July, and it's called Rocket Summer, and it's fantastic. And the way it breaks out is in week one, you read stories from 1939 or prior to 1939, all the way back to Mary Shelley if you want. Then in week two, you have 1940s, anything from the 1940s in science fiction. And then in week three, the 1950s, and week four, you finish up with the 1960s. And it stops at the 1960s because right about then is when the new wave happened in science fiction and the whole style of writing for science fiction changed. So this is an excuse to go back and read all of your old science fiction prior to the 1970s and check out magazines and books and stories that you might not have read before or recheck them out, which is exactly what I did. So this is week one. We're doing 1939 before. So I went in and I pulled out my copy of Amazing Stories from April of 1939. So we're right on the cusp there of prior to 1940, but this is Amazing Stories, the famous pulp magazine, the April 1939 edition of it, which is filled with science fiction stories. And Amazing Stories was created by the legendary Hugo Gernsback, who was the editor of Amazing Stories, that began in 1926. And this is the pulp magazine, the very first pulp magazine that concentrated exclusively on science fiction stories. And it is credited with helping to establish science fiction as a genre that could actually stand on its own in the United States of America. And that's probably accurate. This magazine here had a big impact on science fiction in the United States of America and beyond. And this is just a fantastic cover on there. This is why I bought this, is for that wonderful 1939 cover there, almost an Art Deco sort of style spaceship with just bright colors jumping off the page at you. And that's from the title story, The World Without Women, by Robert Ayres. I think it's Robert Ayres. The World Without Women, by Thornton Ayre. Which is the title story here. So the other stories contained in here, and if you're wondering what you get for your 20 cents back in 1939, this would get you 146 pages of science fiction stories. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so you get 7 stories there, and then a bunch of features. And there's your title page for April 1939. And I read the stories, went through and I read them. And they range from mediocre to dreadful. And especially dreadful is the title story of The World Without Women. It's a dreadful story. It's awful. It's set in the far, far future of the year 2020 in the United States of America. That's right, the far future of 2020. Because in 2016 to 2018 in the United States of America, every female species of every animal on Earth dies due to some mysterious illness, and they don't know why. So the title character in this story takes it upon himself. He becomes infatuated when he sees the picture of a very young teenage girl. She might be 20. She's either 18 or 20 years old. And he sees her photo in the newspaper with her 2 scientific parents, and he goes down to the Census Bureau and he gets all of her statistical information on all of her vital stats that are contained at the Census Bureau. And then from that and the photographs in the newspaper, he reconstructs an exact replica of her, an exact identical synthetic replica of this girl that he's become infatuated with. And right down to the last strand of DNA, just off of a couple of photographs and the Census Bureau's data. It's hysterical. But he creates such a perfect replica of this girl that her disembodied brain that is now contained in a jar up on the surface of the moon, yes, you heard me correctly, a disembodied brain on the surface of the moon is drawn down to this exact perfect replica of her body on Earth and invests the body with a ghost-like spirit that then instructs our hero on how to build the rocket ship, the very same rocket ship here on the cover of the magazine, that he then flies to the moon and then takes her real brain and implants it into the synthetic body of this love interest that he has created as sort of a love robot, and it's every bit as bad as it sounds. Let me read you the last couple paragraphs out of this story. Here he is putting the real brain into the synthetic body and replacing the synthetic brain. You've got some nice interior artwork illustrations here in this magazine. Love that font for Amazing Stories on the cover. Great 1939 font. And then there he is creating the synthetic body. Get a little bit of tintillation there, but the most strategic parts are covered up by the bars going over the tube there that he's got her encased in for the trip to the moon. But you've got to hear the last couple paragraphs of this story are absolutely hilarious. All right, so here are the last couple paragraphs of The World Without Women by Thornton Eyre. Funny thing, he murmured. I don't quite know whether I ought to ask your father's permission to marry you or not. After all, I created you. My body, yes, she agreed softly, and my love I gave you from the first moment these synthetic eyes of mine saw you. Nor do I think anyone will question your title to both. For answer, he clasped her to him, and she felt him shudder slightly. Perry, she uttered anxiously, what is it? He answered slowly, thankfully. It's just that I realize for the first time how truly horrible is a world without women. The end. And what he should have realized, that is Thornton Eyre, that is how truly horrible his story is, because it is horrible. It was awful. But one story here that was actually pretty good. Here's a little insert here. Riddles of Science. You get a lot of this in here. Science riddles on the workings of the human brain. And this was actually interesting. I actually found the ads and the adverts and some of the inserts more interesting than stories. But the story that I liked the best was the Invisible Invasion by Frederick and Arnold Coomer Jr. And remember, this is written in 1939, just 4 months before Germany invades Poland. And just a lot of the angst and fear over Hitler is imbued in this magazine here. It's a time capsule. And the Invisible Invasion is about a German scientist who goes to London and he brings over a bunch of Nazi collaborators and spies, and they take over a building, and in the basement of the building, they build chemical vats, and they pump an acid into the atmosphere of London that is killing off all the people and destroying the buildings. And the hero in that story, the Invisible Invasion, has to figure out how it's happening and how to stop it. Let me find that one there. There's Madness on Luna. Here's the Invisible Invasion. There you go. Some nice artwork for the Invisible Invasion. Again, that's by Coomer, who was doing quite a bit of writing here back in the 1930s and 1940s. And actually what I found more interesting in this issue here of Amazing Stories was actually the adverts and the inserts I thought were better and actually more engaging than the stories themselves, which went from mediocre to just horrible. And an example of that is on the back here in a letter to the editors. Somebody wrote in about Hitler's hypnotic speaking lure to the editor. And this is hysterical. So this is a clip out from a newspaper article that was sent into the magazine here by a reader about hypnotic speaking held Hitler's lure. And this is from Cleveland, December 28th, in the Associated Press. Science shows that the words of Adolf Hitler reduce his listeners to a submissive state bordering closely on hypnotism. Professor M.D. Steer of Purdue University told the Convention of American Speech Teachers today the frequency of Hitler's voice in a typical sentence, he explained, is 228 vibrations a second, as compared with the 220 vibrations cited by one authority as the usual frequency for anger. So apparently Hitler's vibrancy for when he was angry was much higher than the normal person's. It is his high pitch and his accompanying emotion that puts the German people in a passive state, Dr. Steer said. He stuns them with his words in much the same fashion as we are stunned by an auto horn. And it's an attempt to explain Hitler's ability to kind of enthrall and entrance the German people. And you can really see just the fear of the looming war that was coming up here in 1939, because in 4 months from the publishing of this magazine, Germany will invade Poland and plunge the world into the greatest conflagration that's ever known. And kind of tied in a little bit with that is on the back of it, you've got some military technology going on, and you get a lot of little technology pieces put into these amazing stories here. And this one here with this fighter plane that they've got on the back of it is the future Skyfighter. Future wars will be fought in the air. Squadrons of huge bombers will attack cities far from their bases, and there will be defense planes such as the Skyfighter to combat them. Tiny, unbelievably fast, these fighters will advance to intercept the oncoming bombers. Their purpose will be to destroy the enemy before he comes within striking distance. In principle, these tiny ships will be a flying wing with a teardrop fuselage just adequate enough to carry its single pilot, a powerful 1-inch cannon in the nose, rapid-fire guns firing the latest and deadliest incendiary bullets. And this is really prescient, but unfortunately not for the Allies, but for Germany, because that looks almost exactly like Germany's Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, which they made operational in 1944. And again, this is 1939, and the Me-163 looked almost identical to this, except that it was rocket propelled instead of having a push prop in the tail of the plane. And it had a cannon mounted right in its nose, just like this. The design was almost identical, and it was a very deadly plane in 1944, except that it only had about 7 to 10 minutes of operational time before its rocket fuel ran out. And its rocket fuel had a tendency to explode in the plane. It was so combustible. And once the fuel had run out and the Me-163 was gliding down to land, it was extremely vulnerable at that point to Allied fighters, which would come down and just shoot these things down. But when it was in the air and under rocket power, it was just death incarnate in the sky. You did not want to tangle with an Me-163. Also, the Me-163 is credited by some people as being the first plane to actually break the sound barrier ahead of Chuck Yeager. There was a report of one Me-163 rocket-propelled plane, the first operational rocket-propelled plane in the world, reaching a speed of 700 miles an hour, which would have been well before Chuck Yeager. But there you got it. You've got amazing stories, 7 great stories, all complete. They're from April of 1939, and that's going to start me off here for Rocket Summer with my first reading here in week 1. And my second reading is going to be, for a video up on Friday, is going to be The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. That is tiny, so I'm sure I will get through that one. I never realized just how slim of a book this is. I got to check this out, see if that's an abridged version. Hopefully this is not an abridged version, but I do like that cover on there. Really good looking cover. But that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. That is week 1 of Rocket Summer. I'll have video 2 of week 1 up on Friday, and then we'll be into week 2 of the event, which should be a lot of fun. With that, I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I'll catch you guys next time.